Hey everybody, Joe Peluso here from Complete Payroll. Welcome to another episode of PeopleWork. PeopleWork, of course, is the series where we interview experts on a wide variety of topics under the human capital management, human resources umbrella, all for the benefit of anybody whose job it is to manage a workforce or take care of people. Today, I was fortunate to have two guests on, Aleece Burgio and Chris Harrigan, both from the Barclay Damon law firm. Chris and Aleece are cannabis attorneys, and they were very kind to come on and discuss some of the high-level points of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, the MRTA or MARTA, that was recently passed in New York State. Back on March 31st, Governor Cuomo signed the MRTA into law, and essentially it legalized recreational marijuana use. So naturally, we had some questions about what impact, if any, this would have on businesses, business owners, the business climate in general. And Chris and Aleece were very kind to come on and answer some of those questions. So very proud and very pleased to present that interview to you. In the meantime, please check out their podcast. Aleece has been sort of colloquially known as the Cannabis counselor. So search for that podcast wherever you get your podcast. But in the meantime, I'm very happy to present my interview with Chris Harrigan and Aleece Burgio from the Barclay Damon law firm on the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. Enjoy. Aleece, Chris, are you there?
We are.
You are there.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, cool. So yeah, I'm super lucky to have you guys. You locally, at least, I'm sure, but are the go-tos for this new law. So why don't you quickly well, first of all, introduce yourselves, and then if you want to introduce the topic that we're going to be talking about today.
Hi, my name is Aleece Burgio. I'm special counsel and service team leader for the Cannabis division of Barclay Damon. I have been in the cannabis space for about 6 years now. Started out in Portland, Oregon, and then moved back home to Buffalo. And have been happy here since with New York State. But we're going to be talking a lot about the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act, which is now New York State has legalized adult use sales for those over 21. And then Chris is going to take it into a more specialized topic for those listening regarding labor and employment.
And good morning. I'm Chris Harrigan. I'm a partner in Barclay Damon's labor and employment group. I'm also a member of the cannabis service team that Aleece runs. I've been a labor and employment attorney for the better part of the last 20 years. And in that regard, have handled all types of matters, including issues regarding drug testing, since 2014 issues in respect to medical marijuana and how that has impacts on the workplace. So have done a lot of work and research and spoken quite a bit on this new law and the impacts that it has in the workplace across the state. So glad to be joining everybody this morning.
Awesome. All right. So I guess, either of you can answer this. So what, just obviously don't go into the whole, the law is extensive, and it's, I've heard you guys talk about that. New York is what, the 13th state is that right? Aleece, you're muted, Aleece. Yeah.
Sorry, actually, it's the 15th state.
15th state. Okay.
But there's some discretion with that because, Virginia also has legalization, and a bunch of states happened at the same time. So you'll hear some people say 15, some say 16 or 17.
All right. So yeah. So I guess I've heard you mention in previous interviews that you've done and stuff that New York has one of the more progressive. The law that we pass is more progressive by comparison. So what sort of sets our law apart from others, other states?
Sure. So I think the big reason why they're calling New York the most progressive state for purposes of adult use legislation, it has been really defined by their social equity principles. And what I mean by that is there's a really big emphasis on giving back to communities who have been disproportionately impacted by the prohibition. And so That happened in a few different ways through this bill. It happened through one, a licensing structure. So they have what's called social equity applicants as part of the bill. And you can qualify as a social equity applicant if you're a woman, a minority, a disabled service veteran, a disadvantaged farmer, or part of a community who's been disproportionately impacted. And that can be through like a zip code. There also is this social and economic take back. So the revenue generated from the legalization of marijuana, so all that tax revenue that's coming in, 40% of that is going back to community reinvestment fund to help with, again, communities who have been disproportionately impacted. So, and it's not necessarily related to cannabis. It could be, they're helping fix the broken street light. It could be putting on another bus line, just all different stuff, I think, to help facilitate that those areas that have been harmed by the prohibition. And then the other part of that is the expungement component. And the expungement is it's this automatic expungement that's happening. It's important because, at first there was a decriminalization in 2019 that allowed you to have a certain amount on you. And now you can have up to 3 ounces on your person. And so anyone who had a crime where they were caught with, 3 ounces on them can have it automatically expunged. And so some really powerful language in the legislation that gives back a lot to the community.
That's great. All right. So obviously, our focus being Complete Payroll, being a payroll company, our focus is always on the business, how this, any sort of law, how it affects businesses and how businesses operate going forward. So, and this, I think, Chris, is your specialty. So what, I guess, what are the bigger impacts that this new law has for employers?
Yeah, and Joe, while there's a number of aspects of the MRTA that aren't effective yet because the rules and the regs haven't been promulgated, and we don't know about how the licensing is going to work and the application process necessarily. Those recreational dispensaries aren't yet open. As of right now, there's some other things that directly affect employers that are effective immediately. For example, the biggest, Aleece talked about one of them, and that's the expungement of the criminal records. Now, it's supposed to be automatic. I don't know that if you actually ran a report right now that it would, if you had an offense in respect to marijuana, that it would show up or not. But the first thing that all employers ought to be looking at, and they've probably looked at this already, is the issue of what you're asking about in respect to your criminal convictions on a job application. So that's number one. And that's been, criminal convictions on job applications have been an issue in the last several years because there's a number of upstate metropolitan areas that have, I'll say, outlawed it. And there's a lot of caveats there that we don't need to get into, but just that's something to be aware of in respect to job applications and whether or not there are any hits in respect to marijuana convictions. So that's the first thing. But probably more importantly, what the act did is it extended the scope of what's covered under what's referred to as the New York Recreational Activities Law in the state of New York. So, before the MRTA was passed, recreational activities are everything from drinking a beer at your house to being a member of a union or supporting a certain political party or your favorite sports team or whatever. In 2021, this always manifests where? On social media, right? I mean, that's typically where we see it. What the MRTA has done is it has expanded and amended the language of the New York labor law to include legal marijuana use as a protected activity under the Recreational Activities Act. So, for example, going forward, if someone has a social media post and it shows them using cannabis, smoking a joint at home on a Saturday afternoon, whatever the case may be, where that potentially could have been grounds in the past for an employer to say, hey, we don't like the light this sheds, upon the company. It shows you exercise poor judgment, whatever. That activity is now expressly covered under the recreational activities law, meaning it is illegal for you as an employer to discipline someone, to discharge someone, or to refuse to hire someone on that basis. You can't do that anymore. It's illegal. So, a lot of people have said to us, well, what does that mean, Chris? Does that mean that I have to let people come high to work? Does that mean that when people go out on their smoke breaks that I need to have somebody, if they want to go smoke a joint with all the cigarette smokers, do that? Does that mean that I have to abandon my safety, all the safety measures that we've put in place at our production facility? And the answer is absolutely not. There are some specific exceptions that are in place, and there's three of them that everybody needs to be aware of. So the first two deal with either with state or governmental regulations, and it goes like this. Under the first exception, if taking disciplinary action against somebody who's engaged in off-duty cannabis use is required, whether under a federal statute, regulation, ordinance, or something from the state, then that's okay. You can continue to do this. And the classic example is our employers who have people that are engaged in interstate commerce that are governed by the Department of Transportation. Okay, so that's number one. If you need to do it pursuant to law or rule or regulation, fine. The next exception is if you not doing anything, if not doing something in respect to the legal use of cannabis consumption puts you in jeopardy of losing a federal government contract, losing federal funding, then you can continue to do it. Then it's okay. You need to follow the guidelines of your federal funding grants, and you need to follow the contract if you've got a federal contract. So, for both of those first two exceptions I gave you, it's important that everybody knows you got to know what your requirements are, right? You can't just say, well, it's still against federal law, so we're going to comply with federal law. That's not good anymore. It's got to be very narrowly focused. It's important that you get if you get government money from the feds for a grant, get your grant requirements out, get your federal contracts out, understand the law, call your attorneys if you need to say, hey, I think I'm subject to this, or I've got some drivers. Are they subject to the DOT requirements? That's important. So those are the first two exceptions. And the third exception, which is important, Joe, it relates to what I call the impairment exception. Okay, so that says that if somebody comes to work, or what's referred to in the statute as specific articulable symptoms, if you demonstrate those, you can be disciplined, you can be discharged. Now, the MRTA didn't do anybody favors. You would think they would define what specific articulable symptoms are, but they didn't. But we know what they are. We know what they are, and we think that there's going to be more guidance that comes out or regs that talk about this. But it's all the hallmarks. It's odor. It's delayed motor skills. It's bloodshot eyes. It's slowed down performance. If you have somebody that comes to work or is in work and they're demonstrating these characteristics, and you have a level of inquiry with them and it's determined that they're high, they can be disciplined, they can be discharged. So those are the three big ones right there that relate to that's how this act has changed what's included under the recreational activities law, what's protected, but also importantly provides the three exceptions to that rule. So it's criminal convictions, it's the recreational activities law, and then a lot of people have asked us about drug testing and what ramifications this has in respect to drug testing, and the answer is surprisingly the act says nothing about drug testing, nothing at all. So people have said, can we continue to do it? And the answer is Sure, you can. I mean, you can definitely do it if it's required by law. You should continue to do it. But you can continue to drug test. The question is just, what can you do with it afterwards, right? And so that's been called into question, and it'll be interesting to see how a lot of employers kind of move forward. Many of our clients, especially at production facilities, have interestingly stopped testing. They've stopped including THC in their drug screen because they've said, if we test for THC, we'll have no workers. And they don't want to deal with the liability. So I know I've said a lot. Those are the three big issues, and it'll be interesting going forward, to say the least.
I was just gonna say, it's as if you're reading my notes here. It's so weird that a state law would be ambiguous. Usually these things are pretty cut and dry. I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it's a big act. I mean, there's a lot there, and it is glaring some things that are not there. So very interesting.
So it's not open season, right? It's not it's not like it's I imagine it's the same as any. Nothing changes in terms of it's like coming to work drunk or something. I mean, I assume it's being treated as essentially just like alcohol, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not give anyone license to use marijuana immediately before your shift and then come to work and do your job high. That's not what this means. Not at all.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Aleece, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you got to kind of treat it also, I think, like cigarettes. So if it's like a smoke-free campus, right? Obviously, there's no smoking, which you're going to see anyway. You're not really going to see anybody under 21 being able to smoke. So colleges are most likely out of count. And then if they're smoke-free campuses, anyone who's 21 and older, you're out too. And they have federal money. But, you think about it like, if you're going to smoke, where would you be able to smoke a cigarette, right? That's kind of the same principle of what they've said in the bill, but a lot more conscientious thought process, more so than I think a cigarette. People are really going to have to really think about when they're smoking in public. It's going to be a kind of a culture shock too, with people being able to carry up to 3 ounces on themselves. I don't know if anybody's familiar with weed, but 3 ounces is actually a lot of weed. So it's a very different lifestyle that we'll be seeing now and for police too, there's a lot of ramifications just for the passing of this.
So, what should employers be doing now in terms of policies or handbooks and stuff like that to adapt to these changes and communicate them to their employees?
Yeah. So the first thing is to the extent you have a policy in respect to drug use in the workplace, you need to look at it immediately. There's catch-all language that's typically included in all employee handbooks that needs to be looked at. That needs to be modified to allow for these changes. We've been busy doing a lot of that for businesses all over the state. Really, that's really the first thing you need to do. And then, as I mentioned, make sure that you're in compliance in respect to your applications. And if they're asking for information regarding criminal convictions, those are, both of those are great starts right there, Joe, in terms of what people ought to be doing immediately.
So if you're an entrepreneur and you wanted to start a business in the cannabis world, whether it's a dispensary or you want to be a grower or whatever, what considerations are there if for those, what new industries do you see popping out of this? And then what are some maybe considerations for those guys?
Sure. So there's a lot of different license structures that are going to be available. You could be a cultivator, processor, a manufacturer, a delivery license, a distribution license, retail. One of the really unique ones that we're going to see, and I think it's going to be a kind of, again, a culture shock, is on-site consumption lounges. So it's not going to be like a bar, right, where you can buy on-site and then consume on-site. An on-site consumption lounge is actually going to be, you buy off-site, but you're allowed to consume at that location. And so this is important, and it ties back to that social equity principle, because there's a lot of people who aren't going to be able to smoke in their homes, right? If you're a renter and your landlord doesn't like it, if you're in Schedule 8 housing, federal housing, we don't want people smoking in their cars, like, Chris said, and we have to be mindful of that stuff. And so this on-site consumption lounge will be like a cigar lounge, but I think a little bit more out in the open. And you'll most likely probably see dispensaries and on-site consumption lounges being pretty close to each other, because they're going to go to their dispensary and then they're going to walk a couple paces and go to the on-site consumption lounge. But, what we're really going to see like a big boom is going to be real estate. So what I mean by that is, in the next year and a half, 2 years, and it's already starting to happen, people are going to be heavily looking into greenhouse space. I can't tell you how many of our clients have gotten reached out to by investors downstate, being like, are they looking to sell? Especially if you're the hemp space already, because you have that infrastructure already in place. So the people are looking at that. They're looking at a lot of industrial buildings for the processing and indoor cultivation side of it. And then, good real estate for commercial. Are you in a plaza that gets a lot of foot traffic? Are you right on, for us, at least in Buffalo, are you right on Allen? Are you on Elmwood? Like, where are you looking? So that's going to be a really important part of this process. And you're going to see that real estate skyrocket with pricing, because just of the demand, it's going to be wild.
All right. So, if you are interested in entering that space, or if you are a business that needs some help sort of navigating this, you guys are the guys to call, right?
You're always the guys to call. What do you mean, Joe? No, she's
fair enough. No, yeah. Call Barclay Damon.
Call us for everything. Call us for all your stuff is what we're actually.
Right, so I guess, that was my sort of lame attempt at a segue into how do people get in touch with you guys for help with this stuff.
Sure. So you feel free to email me at aburgio, Burgio at barclaydamon.com. We answer emails pretty quickly. And then Chris is C Harrigan, Harrigan at barclaydamon.com. And we're happy to help.
I'll put the links. All that stuff will be, this will live on a number of spaces, so I'll make sure I include all that stuff everywhere. And then also your podcast, the cannabis, you're the cannabis counselor. So we'll definitely make sure to link to that. It was super helpful in prep for this, and I'm a subscriber now, so you got to subscribe.
Oh, love it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Awesome.
Okay. Any parting thoughts? Anything that you want to add before we close out here?
I'll just say that as we, having been in this space for a really long time and seeing this transition from people being not okay with marijuana, then people being kind of okay with medical, and now we're about to throw it in people's faces that it's an adult use space and it's going to be very interactive in our community. Just to have a lot of patience. We're going to take a lot of time to figure it all out, research and things that associate marijuana with the effects on children being around it, and what happens when you consume it on an edible versus inhaling it. And all that stuff comes actually with the legalization process and money generated from tax revenue to fund that research, which was also a very big part of this bill. So, this is going to be a lot of leeway time, I think, for us to kind of get acclimated.
The only thing I would add is just that it's a brave new world. It's going to be new for everybody. So, as I like to say to people, measure twice and cut once, because things will be changing rapidly, and the norm will be it'll be a case by case every time an issue comes up, and there'll be all kinds of things you never anticipated, and those will be the problems that you have on a day-to-day basis. So just make sure you're, as I said, measuring twice and cutting once before acting.
It's always great advice. That was easily my dad's the biggest piece of advice my father gave me was measure twice, go once. So that's great. All right. Chris, Aleece, thank you guys so much for your time and generosity. I'm sure you're probably sick of talking about this already, but it's super helpful. And I think that our clients and anybody that's hearing or watching this is going to get a lot from this. So I'll definitely include your contact information. Hopefully we'll reach out to you. And thank you guys again. This has been great.
Our pleasure,
problem.
Joe. Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
Joe.
guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no problem. Have a great day.
Take
Bye.
care.
Okay, so that was Aleece Burgio and Chris Harrigan from the Barclay Damon Law Firm discussing some of the top level points of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. Hopefully you came away from this with some guidance for how your business or organization can navigate the new law. If you have any questions for myself, for Chris, or for Aleece, if you'd like to suggest a topic for a future PeopleWork episode, or if you'd like to be a guest on a future PeopleWork episode, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Email address is peoplework@completepayroll.com. Also, make sure to listen and subscribe to Barclay Damon's podcast. It's called The Cannabis Counselor with Aleece Burgio. You can get that wherever you get your podcast. But in the meantime, thank you again so much for listening or watching. And of course, welcome to Payroll Country.